a good chodesh to everybody, and a good Chag Kosher V'Sameach. Rosh Chodesh is a holiday, it's a moed, and especially with the impending or upcoming month of Elul. It's Rosh Chodesh Elul now. You can almost hear the signs or the sounds of the shofar. And with that, a little bit of a accelerated heartbeat. But we're all excited for Elul. I thought it would be important and quite helpful for many of us, including myself, to hear about how to maximize the month of Elul in a spiritually uplifting and empowering way, while also doing it in a healthy, not over anxious or despairing type of way. And there is no better man that I can think of other than maybe a davening partner of mine, as this holy person davens right behind me in shul. Always there for free therapy. He is a licensed psychotherapist, and I believe that he is also a Talmud of some of the greatest rabbis of our generation. You'll correct me if that's incorrect, but I'd like to welcome the famous Mordechai Weiss to the Motivation Congregation podcast. How are you? Welcome in.
Thank you so much, Michal. Really appreciate the opening remarks and those kind words. And I am looking forward to trying to respond to some of those points that you just mentioned. And hopefully that our discussion will be a tayeles. There'll be thoughtful ideas that we'll discuss, and hopefully we'll all be able to approach Elul in a spiritual and healthy way, so that we can use the experience in the way it'll be the most beneficial for everybody.
Did I, amen to that. Did I get that right? It's licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist. Is that the official title?
Yes, that's all. That's all a good reference to who I am and what I do. So yeah.
The great ones, they speak about you. The great rabbis speak about you very highly, and they're ones that I think that they even view you as I think the right word is confidant, or they speak with you about it. Who I forgot, who is the rabbis that you learn under? Just for the audience, where did you study in yeshiva in your youth, and who are your rabbis?
Okay, so I studied in the Philadelphia yeshiva known as Philly. I was there for a few years, and then from there I went on to Eretz Yisrael, learned in the Brisker Kailul, and then after I got married, I went back to Eretz Yisrael. I had the big zchus of being in Eretz Yisrael for 5 years after I was married, and at that time I got close to Abaya Baruch Finkel, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and at the same time I also became close to what I think might be two of the foremost Musar personalities in our generation. Reb Ruvain Leuchter is one of them. He is a very prominent Talmud of Shlomo Wolbe.
I'm obsessed with him. Not to say obsessed with therapists, but I'm obsessed with Reb Ruvain Leuchter. Yeah, we've heard of him here.
And as well as Reb Noach Orlowek, who is also a well-known mashgiach. Both of them authored several books or svarim, and they're well-known in the chinuch world. Definitely big thinkers in terms of psychology, what we call chinuch, shalom bayis, musar, how to work on oneself, self-work, working with others. So definitely, they both have been tremendous influences on my life, and I consider it a big zchus that I learned from them for several years. And I still keep up the shaykhs, and I still learn from them. And
Wow.
that's a very, that's extremely, extremely helpful for the work that I do within the Frum community, working with clients. It's very hard to separate. The clients that I see are pretty much all from, typically Lakewood, either Bachrim or young men. And religion is such a integral part of what's happening in people's lives that having a framework that's informed from a religious perspective definitely comes into tremendous use in everything that I do, even in my office.
That's brilliant, and that is quite the bullpen and lineup of rabbinic personalities. I didn't know you learned in the Brisker Koilo. That's some top end, high end learning, and you're in Koilo longer than I've been in Koilo. So let's hope that I can get past the 5 year mark. But um, I think you're the perfect man then for the job. I come to you holding a message um, of wanting help for myself and for fellow, as you call them, clients, fellow Bahrain Jewish youth, maybe even adults. Elul is my favorite time of the year because I love that it's a short month. In the Elul's man in yeshiva ain't 6 months. It ain't like the winter's man or the summer's man. Elul's intense and definitely in the confines of on the walls of a yeshiva. Elul is famous, along with the impending judgment and notwithstanding, or definitely included in all this, is also a fair amount of anxiety and perhaps even a bit of some unhealthy anxiety, which I like to pose the question to you directly. Is there a way that we can keep Elul a strong, I don't want to say intense month, but a different than all the other months type of idea that there is the high holidays and judgment coming up? But is there a way to go about it? And how would you advise somebody that wants to go about it in a really, really productive way, but a non anxious and completely healthy way?
That's a really excellent question, and it's something, Michal, that very much is relevant to so many people. And while the discussion that we're going to talk about is as it pertains to Elul, but of course, it also can come up in all areas of Avodas Hashem. So Elul, as you mentioned, is a time of generally where people are feeling more intense because of the seriousness of the days. But at the same time, Avodas Hashem in general is serious, and often anxiety can be mixed in there in an unhealthy way. And those people as well, even who are not specifically wondering about Elul, but even people who might be wondering about in general, how do I approach the seriousness of Avodas Hashem without creating some form of unhealthy anxiety? I think that would be relevant to think about it in that broader way as well.
You have my attention, and I'm sure you have the rest of the world's attention. So, what's the secret sauce? How do I know? How about let's go like this and get very, very, very direct. How do I know that something is a step too far and maybe closer into the pool of anxiety and not healthy Yiras Shomayim?
Yes. So I want to reflect a little bit on what I was saying before and what was brought up in terms of my background. And that is also why I feel that in some way, I hope that I would consider myself qualified to respond to this, is because I've also not only is my response going to be, based off what psychology thinks about anxiety and what's healthy and what's unhealthy. Definitely a lot of my thinking on this topic is influenced by Torah perspectives, by the Rebbeim that I learned by as well, in terms of how to approach Avodas Hashem in a healthy way. And the other piece is that on the topic of anxiety, which I think might be helpful for people to know, is that I am considered an expert in anxiety. It is one of my areas of specialty, and I trained under some of the foremost experts in the world, perhaps, on anxiety treatment. So definitely it's something that I've learned about, and I also sit with clients. This is what I do pretty much a whole day. I do have several specialties. So I specialize in anxiety and OCD, and the third one is Kedusha struggles. Maybe that's something we'll talk about as well at some point during our conversation. So those are my three areas of specialty. Anxiety and OCD are very closely related. And since I sit with people who struggle with these areas, so definitely something that I've had a chance to think about. I've grown through getting to know what's happening in people's lives and how to help them, how to work with them. So I do hope that my answer then will be on target and will be helpful. Okay, so let's try to talk about anxiety and how do we approach all this in a healthy way. So the first thing we have to understand is that when it comes to Elul or Yamim Neirom and all those times that are considered, days of awe, and there's judgment and all of that, we have to recognize that Yiras Shomayim does not mean being nervous or under stress. And any time that we are going to be using some form of a Torah-based approach to something, including Yiras Shomayim, it has to be something that's workable and functional. So since the way we see people who are under stress, under duress, under tension, when people stop functioning well, when people are suffering because of what they might think, let's say, is the requirement or the religious requirement, so we first need to just have a corrective understanding of what the Torah perspective actually is. So I think we need to talk a little bit about that first, and then maybe I'll shift a little bit to anxiety.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect.
Okay. So it's true that there are words that, are used in the Svarim that describe fear and trepidation and all kinds of things like that as we approach the seriousness of Rosh Hashanah and etc. And while that is something that's important, but we have to recognize that the fear that they are referring to is something that is very constructive, something that can be used in a way. And the best way that I think that we could translate it in English to the way that might look like would be to approach either these days or this subject with a sense of seriousness and awe. When you approach something with seriousness and awe, it's because you take the topic or you take the moment seriously. There's something very serious on the table that we need to be doing. There's some very important, that's another word that we can use, a very important endeavor that has to happen. For example, in Elul, the call of the hour is Teshuvah. And there's something that we need to be working on. We need to be working. We need to be doing something. So therefore, we need to attach a great importance and a great seriousness to what's in front of us. But we have to also recognize that that's different than saying that we have to be in a state of fear or being overwhelmed or stressed, which we know both from, experience and we know from what works is that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. When we're overwhelmed and we're fearful, what happens is people just freeze, either you freeze or you get overwhelmed. And definitely anything you do in that state can't be done in a way that is well thought out, and it typically doesn't have any lasting effects. It cannot be that, the purpose of Elul is just to, get shaken up and just to feel overwhelmed a little bit. And when it comes to the Elul, you feel super overwhelmed. And then, you breathe a sigh of relief, Matzi and Kippur, and you say, thank God, I hope I made it through this. And that's the whole purpose. That doesn't seem
It can't be.
rational.
It can't be.
Yeah.
Wow.
It cannot be. So, but isn't the day so serious? Isn't the topic so serious? So I have some analogies for that. A brain surgeon or a heart surgeon, definitely what they're doing is very serious. The slightest wrong move and, that has a disastrous outcome. Somebody who's working in the army and somebody who's loading ammunition onto, the bomber planes. That's very super serious. You don't want to mess up when you're doing that kind of work. You don't want to just be, whatever. I'll just, let me pass you those explosives and throw it across the room. No, that's not the way you handle it. But at the same time, the last thing a brain surgeon, you don't want a brain surgeon who's nervous before he comes into the operating room. And you don't want somebody who's working in the army to be shaking in fear as he's dealing with the, ammunition that he's got to be working with. You want somebody who is calm, very calm. 1 second, but doesn't that mean then that they will be lackadaisical and non-caring and they'll, approach the whole thing as if it makes no difference? No, of course not. Because being calm is not a contradiction to taking the work as something that is serious, something that's important, something that you need to be doing with care and attention. but that does not mean though that it has to be in a state of shock and a state of feeling overwhelmed, which is completely unproductive. So I think, clarifying what seems to be the Torah-based approach, just to be able to say that, hey, we have to first recognize what is the truth about what the Torah wants from us when it comes to El Yom Neiram. And if we can kind of make that assumption that what I said now is correct, and again, I'm not making this up myself. These are topics that I've learned from people that are greater than myself. It makes a lot of sense, definitely.
This is $1 million answer. I love the way that you've kind of came at it through, first there's the Torah sources, because part of it is keeping the authenticity of Elul and working through that it is Yomim Noirayim, and there's B'Rosh Hashanah Yikasevun U'V'Yom Tzoim Kippur Yichasemu Mi B'Mayim Mi Ba'esh. I would take the pestilence and some of the other ones that sound a little bit easier than Mayim and Aish, but keeping that, and it sounds like from the drift, if I'm catching it properly, is that is staying calm, but staying real. Maybe enlighten me a little bit more. How do I tell the difference? How can I tell the difference between Yiras Shomayim and anxiety?
If I'd have to say it in a few words, it's when we are being productive or we're being unproductive. I too learned in yeshivas where you felt that level of intensity, when it comes Yom Neiram or when an Elul man. When you just start getting those butterflies in your stomach and you feel frozen and now you can't really do anything, or you're just feeling overwhelmed, or you hear some schmooze and you're feeling so overwhelmed from that, then that's a good way of knowing that there's really not much that's productive about this, and this is not going to be a productive form of Yiras Shomayim. Yes, it sounds like it's the same thing. It's fear of heaven or fear of God or fear of judgment. But it can't be that the fear that they're describing in the Svarim is asking to have this type of fear that becomes completely unproductive. In fact, we saw Salanter in one of his letters, he describes Yiras Shomayim as being a productive force. He says, Yira is the force that drives people into action. So if Yira becomes a force of inaction, and that shuts us down, and that allows us to just feel overwhelmed and stressed, and that we feel like we can't do anything, or anything that we can formulate, any type of work we can formulate in those moments is short-lived, and it's not based on any calm approach, that's a pretty good sign that we are not using the Yira that's called for in these days in the correct manner.
Is incredible. It comes to mind the whole Elul, I believe, is very much in the sources built up as from the Rashi Tevis, the acronym of Ani Ledodi V'Dodi Li, that verse from Shir Hashirim, which is one pasuk that just basically means this is a relationship of love. Ani Ledodi V'Dodi Li, I'm to my beloved and my beloved is to me. So it is kind of interesting to go back to the very source of the whole thing, which is that if God is some big scary father and it invokes fear, then it does, and it's not constructive, we can be pretty certain maybe that's not what Elul is supposed to be used for. In turning the page here, before the show, going back and forth a little bit and being able to understand a little bit about the value that I thought all of the world, or as many people that listen to the Motivation Congregation, very much need to hear. You had mentioned that what you see in your experiences and meetings with people is there is a fair amount of anxiety that is provoked because of something that you call perfectionism, which I believe, if I studied enough English or listened to my dad enough, means that people are obsessed with being perfect, and somehow that leads towards some ill effects. Mr. Mordechai, would you care to elaborate on that?
Definitely. Okay, should I first reflect, Michal, a little bit on what I was saying before, that we could kind of divide the religious perspective on how to approach Elul, and then in terms of like anxiety, what's considered healthy and not? Should I speak a little bit about that first and then
Yes,
come to perfectionism?
perfect.
Okay, so just to answer the part about, anxiety, when it's considered, healthy or unhealthy, it's very similar to what we discussed till now, and it basically, comes down to if it's productive or not, right? So as long as somebody says, hey, I'm feeling a little bit of pressure, a little bit of a push, a little bit of something that's, giving me pushing me into
Hmm.
action, that's fine, and as long as people in general are functioning well, then we don't necessarily consider that an anxiety problem. It's because it's not a problem, It becomes a problem when it's a problem. It becomes a problem when people are suffering, when somebody is not functioning well because of their anxiety, when somebody is feeling, worn down physically, there could be physical symptoms, when they're obsessing with worry or all kinds of thoughts in their mind. And that interferes in, proper functioning and in just, living a calm life. That's when we consider anxiety a problem. So it's when it becomes excessive and it becomes non-functional, or interferes in functioning, that's when we consider it a problem. So I want to just address that point, and I think it's, kind of falls off the first point
That
that
is
we spoke about as well.
definitely. And I want to mention that I'm sure there's different parts of anxiety that is one your specific specialist in is obsessive compulsive disorder, and that is called OCD for short. Is that a type of anxiety? Is that I'm inquiring.
So yes, that's a very good question. So I believe that in the, we have what's called DSM, and that is the Bible, so to speak, for mental health. And in there, they classify all the disorders. And I think in the previous version of the DSM, they did put OCD as a class under anxiety. Since then, they separated it and they made it into its own disorder, but simply because it had its own defining features, and that's kind of the reason that they separated it. But that's kind of just the clinical
Hmm.
response. But I think what's more relevant is that definitely OCD is a form of anxiety. OCD always comes along with anxiety. Those who experience OCD are anxious about whatever it is that they're obsessing about, whatever behaviors they're doing. So it has a lot of similarities, but there are differences. And often, there can be somebody who's very knowledgeable about treating anxiety, but not specifically OCD,
Hmm.
or the reverse. And you do need to have, good awareness and training in each of those things, because there are some nuances and differences in the approach that we use to treat
Hmm.
OCD and anxiety. Yeah.
Hmm. So, so now that we have clarified exactly what everyone's suffering from and struggling with and what we all need help with, um, be it as it may. So now Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is coming, and there is this drive to repent. I'd like to wake up on time for Shacharis every day. I daven at 7:30. I'm gonna be personal. It'll be like some free therapy, and I like to be there at 7:25 so I can gather my thoughts and put my tefillin on in a very calm and measured way. Maybe even have some time to say the morning karbanos, those sacrifices, and get the kiyar in there and the carbon tamid. But um, I can't promise or make a shavua that I always am on time, and I would like to perfect that this coming Elul. That's one of my kabbalas, one of my commitments. Um, I'd like to be perfect at it, and I'd like to turn over, or on the stop of a dime stop, waking up late. I know that ain't exactly how it goes about. In making a commitment to wake up on time and dealing with anxiety in this way, in dealing in the search for perfection in this way, and hoping to turn the leaf over. Could you advise me, doctor, as to or Mordechai, as to how to best go about this in the most healthy and productive way?
So let's talk about perfectionism, that you brought up. And I think that that's a topic that hopefully can be relevant, and whatever we discuss, it can be helpful to a lot of people. So we are a society that very much values outcome, that values performance, and that definitely rubs off on our approach to religion as well. And that's the focus of our discussion here. So when religion becomes about performance and outcomes, that's basically what we call perfectionism. Perfectionism means that I need to be doing everything perfectly, I need to be functioning perfectly, and I need to get to the desired outcome and result that I would like. And if not, and if I don't get there, then I can feel very crushed from that. That's what could happen on the one end. So there's basically two things that could happen, right? So if I set my bar as needing to be perfect and needing to do whatever it is that I'm working on in a very perfect way, so on the one hand, I could work in a way that's completely non-functional. So sometimes we have boys who will suddenly, devote themselves to learning in a very perfectionistic way. They want to be the Gadol Hadar, and they may, learn way more than they're capable of handling. Too many hours, not enough sleep, not taking care of their basic needs, not socializing the way a young man needs to, and they can pretty much cause themselves to get burnt out or to suffer other mental health consequences along the way. Many of those type of boys show up in my office, and the underlying problem there is one of perfectionism. So there's an approach of approaching this thing, this I want to excel in learning, or I want to excel in whatever it is, or I need to daven in a certain way, or I need to work in B'nai Machaveh in a certain way. And if the way I'm working is needing to be perfect, so then you work like a madman, or you work in a way that's completely not necessarily according to one's own nature or their capabilities. And that can, of course, create a lot of anxiety, right? So anxiety shows up for us when we feel overwhelmed and incapable of dealing with what's in front of us. That's typically what creates anxiety. We can't deal with the circumstances. So if religion becomes so pressuring, so overwhelming, then I'm going to feel pretty anxious because I can't possibly live up to the demand that's in front of me. And that'll just make me feel worried and make me feel nervous.
Mhm.
And,
But you can't be asking me. You can't be asking me then to accept complacency, and
oh,
to
very good.
therefore just become an average Joe and not a great Torah sage, because that sounds even worse.
Right. That's very good. That's a good question. That's a good question. So, because we are so used to thinking in terms of perfectionism, that your assumption is the automatic assumption of what people think is the alternative. Well, if I'm not going to be perfect, and if I'm not going for perfection, then Mordechai, you're basically advocating for complacency. You're advocating for mediocrity, because why should I do anything if I'm not going to be
I'm gonna
perfect?
be a Benoni for the rest of my life.
Yeah, yeah. So that, I think, just shows us how much this perfectionistic view is entrenched, that we think that it's either that or the alternative is sitting on a couch and eating chips. Here, I'll show you what the alternative is to perfectionism. That doesn't mean sitting on a couch with your feet up, eating chips and drinking soda. The alternative to perfectionism, saying that there's something important and there's something serious in front of me that needs to get done. Learning is very important. Bittul Torah, super serious. Davening, very important. Now, how do I approach this important, serious task in a way that's manageable, in a way that's doable, in a way that's according to my nature, in a way that's going to make sense, in a way that's going to last?
Mm.
That seems to be a great alternative to saying that there's some demand that needs to be reached and there's some outcome I need to get to, which then says that I'm only going to be working in a very unproductive, crazy way that's not going to last. It seems so logical, but it's almost a logic that's lost to so many of us, because we don't, like, you think that if you're not going to have, now here comes a hot word, or maybe what's going to be a hot topic, she'ifas, like if I'm not going to have the drive or the desire to be like, I don't know what, like the Gadol Hadar, then the alternative is that I'm going to sit and do nothing,
Mm-hmm.
which is, not really the case. I think you could have a she'ifa not to be the Gadol Hadar, but just you take the work that's in front of you very seriously. Now, I personally have like 15 Makairis, in Chazal and Svarim, that's the case. But she'ifas is like all the rage, Every yeshiva boy knows you have to have she'ifas. Now, I'm not opposed to she'ifas as long as they're working and they're not killing anybody. The problem is so many boys who come into my office and so many people in society, and even those who don't come into my office, are killed by this perspective that says you need to reach and be something that's completely unattainable, completely, it's beyond anybody's reach, but you need to get there. So either you have two options. Either you work like a madman and then you burn out at some point, or you just keep on working, but you wrecked yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, or you just despair, because you realize after a short time, depends how long it takes you to realize that. But most of us will not be Reb Chaim Kanievsky. There was only one Reb Chaim Kanievsky. That's it.
So what should I aspire to be like? Now I'm feeling unempowered.
Yeah. So the alternative is to work to be what you can be. Now, people know these sayings too, but they don't seem to be like, they don't seem to be, they don't use this way to apply themselves to Avodas Hashem. They all know that, that there's a famous Reb Zisha that he said, the Abish is going to ask him, why don't you like Zisha? I could say these words, but I don't say these words, but still people, it takes a while to integrate this way into our thinking. That, no, I'm going to be what I can be. That's not mediocrity. That's simply saying I'm going to try to be what I can be by taking whatever I need to do in Avodas Hashem seriously. Why do I have to reach for something that's completely beyond my reach? Why is that the way to work? This is so novel, Michal.
It's so novel. It's so novel.
I had a Rosh Hashiva, so I of course, I had the Talmidim, come to me for the help, after they maybe try to go to their Rebbeim and they don't get the help they need, so they send them here or they come here. And this Talmud wanted to be, he actually had some pretty chashuv yichus, and he wanted to be like his, whatever, and like those, that he worked his Avodas Hashem to be all those things. But he was suffering emotionally tremendously. He was full of anxiety. His davening became a burden and took terribly long. He was learning, Friday night till 2 a.m, and he wasn't sleeping enough. So the kid was, on the way to, giving himself, I don't know what, but he was definitely suffering now. And if he continues like this, he's going to, be a mess. So they send him to me. So there's no way, and this goes back to what I said before, I need to be able to talk a perspective that pertains to Avodas Hashem to, to my clients. Because
otherwise, no one's going to listen. He's not going to listen, right? What
am I going to say? Don't be anxious because it says in, my psychology books that you have to, be calm and that you shouldn't work in a way that's... No, but the Torah says, don't you know that you have to work with she'ifas?
The Rambam says we could be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu.
Right, very good. You have all the Makayos. So I know all these Makairis, it's a good thing, but I also know all the other Makairis, right? So I have to speak to them about it. I have no choice, I don't have a beard, but I have a beard inside.
Very nice.
Yeah. But I have to be able to speak to them about how do you approach Avodas Hashem in a calm way. So I do have to talk about she'ifas, and I do have to tell the kids some of what I'm sharing with you here is that I try to have it as a discussion. Don't like tell them, but I have a discussion. How do you approach this? Does this make sense? That makes sense. And I have to try to let them know that you could approach Avodas Hashem in a way that you're not giving up one drop of effort or one drop of seriousness. You don't have to want to be, I'll give a muscle, like if let's say I go to the doctor and he says to me, Mordechai, it's important for you to incorporate exercise in your life, for whatever reason, for your health, you need to do exercise. So you need to, lift weights, or you need to jog, at least, 3 times a week, half hour. So here's the way that I think, based on how people approach Avodas Hashem in a perfectionistic way, would say that you need to approach this. Well, if I'm going to need to exercise 3 times a week, I need to have in my mind that I want to be an Olympian. I want to be able to run in the 100-meter race at the next Olympics, and I need to be able to beat the record. I need to be the world's fastest runner. Because if not, why would I exercise 3 times a week? Why would I go running unless I want to be the Olympian? Michal, does that make any sense to you?
Absolutely not.
Why does that make one drop of sense? So what would you say? Oh, then if you don't want to be an Olympian, you're probably just going to sit on your couch and not do any exercise. You're probably just going to take out a margarita and sit on your couch and drink. No, that's if I'm an idiot. But if I'm able to approach this as something serious and important, not as something overwhelming and scary, and it's serious, it's important. The doctor says for your health, you need to exercise several times a week. I don't need to want to be an Olympian. In fact, I have no interest in being an Olympian, but I do want to be healthy. So therefore, I might decide to exercise several times a week and do that seriously without having any overarching, goal to reach some type of place. No, I don't have to reach anywhere. I just have to do exercise. That's it. Now let's just apply that muscle to learning or any part of Avodas Hashem. Why do you need to be an Olympian in Avodas Hashem? Like, why do you have to want to be a Chaim Kanievsky in order to learn a Teshuvah? You're in the Beis Medrash, you're Yeshiva Bacher, there's a mitzvah called Talmud Torah. That's very serious, very important. Now you need to approach it in a way that works for your life. In fact, let's go back to my example. If let's say I decided, you know what, I want to be an Olympian, there's a good chance that, again, I'll kill myself. Either I'm going to work like a madman the first week, I'll bust my knees, I'll destroy my shoulder. I'm going to try to do some exercise that are completely not according to my nature, that don't work, that won't last. I'll feel overwhelmed by that. So it's the same thing when you apply to Avodas Hashem in the same way, If I try to be something that's way beyond me and I'm working this crazy way, I'm back, right? So why do you have to be that way? What's wrong with approaching it by saying, let me take this seriously, and I'm going to find a way to approach this demand in a way that works, in a way that's going to last, in a way that I can do it calmly. That has nothing to do with she'ifas. That's just saying the topic is important. There's something serious that needs to be done. There's a demand. The Eibishter demands it. You don't have a choice,
It is so, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's so eye-opening because it rubs me the wrong way so intensely. And I think that's why you get paid, to rub people the wrong way and tell them the truth.
It's a lot of fun.
and yet, the more you say it, though, the more it sinks in as hey, I think you're onto something here. There's just coming to mind also so many sources. Actually, working it back towards the Torah sources, I'm pretty sure that's how Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman learns that Rambam, that every person can be as good as Moshe Rabbeinu in his own potential. And I'm sure that once we have this piece of Chachma, dare I say, emes, then it probably works and sings like a song that's shot in so many of these Mara Makomos. And probably can't we say that we could judge that this is correct because of the results that it produces? You would agree with that, wouldn't you? That basically when people adapt this, not accepting of mediocrity, but this, it's like barf when I'm saying it, or vomit. I don't know what the right way to say it is, but this lowering of their aspirations, then they become a better servant of God. Is that true?
I definitely think that's true. It's definitely what I see from experience. It makes all the sense in the world. I can't understand why it would make any sense to work in this she'ifa kind of way. Yes, there might be some people that it does something for, but to say that should be the general approach for the Amaynan, it's so novel, Bachal, that I was saying before, this Rosh Hashiva, who I was seeing his Talmud, so once I shared this kind of idea with this student, he went back, and I said he comes from a very, prominent family, and he shared this with his parents, and apparently, blew their mind, like, what do you mean? He has to want to be like Kivega or something. What's this therapist telling him? And he went to speak to Rosh Hashiva. Basically, Rosh Hashiva called me up like it was like a crisis. Rosh Hashiva called me up, and I don't really have a lot of time, to speak to everybody who wants to speak to me on the phone between, so many clients, and there's all these third, there's Rabbeim, there's Rosh Hashiva, there's parents. So in a way, I can't, have a dialogue like I'm having with you, Bachal, where I can go into length and I can talk all the sources. So simply I had to, say to the Rosh Hashiva, like I was trying to say to him what I'm saying to you, but in a much shorter version. Like he was saying to me, like, what kind of talk is that to tell a Bachar in Yeshiva not to have She'iva? But the reason that he was, so taken aback by that is because the automatic reaction to that is that, oh, so you must mean to be saying to this boy that he should be sitting on a couch. Like, that's obviously what you're saying. They don't understand, that there's a way to approach. It's so novel, but it's so sensible that it's surprising that it should be novel, but it's so sensible. Everything that we said till now, just approach something in a workable way because it's serious and it's important. What do you add on by saying to strive for something that's way beyond your abilities? Like, what is it? Tell me how it helps. What does it do other than create nerves?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it kind of falls into the next intense and super and horribly popular problem that plagues countless people in the Jewish world, if not the world at large, which is the overwhelming feeling of yish, which is in English means despair or hopelessness, which is, just like Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says, one of the most debilitating diseases and yet one of the most contagious diseases. It's easy to catch a bad case of the I'm never going to wake up on time, and I've tried to give up that sin 50 times, but yet I can't, so let me just throw it all away. I have a feeling that these two things go hand in hand, but to point the question directly at you, how does one deal with the hopeless reality that with Elul coming up, it'll probably be just like every other Elul, that I want to wake up on time, I want to give up that sin. I probably will for about a day, maybe a week, maybe if I'm lucky for a month, but after that, I'll probably be right back to where I started, and therefore I feel hopeless.
Very pointed question, Michal, and definitely one that I can identify with. I think most of us can identify with, especially those who've been through many Eluls. And, when a bacher is still very young, he might still be holding on to that she'ifa, where he, thinks this will be the Elul or this will be the year. But it's definitely a painful reality and a painful feeling for a lot of us that we're here again, and did things really change? Did we change? How's it going to be different now? And that's something that I think that's important to address, probably on a lot of people's minds. There's many parts to the question. So in terms of the despair being connected to what we spoke about before, I think that's one aspect of it, right? So if Avodas Hashem is about being perfect, if we need to do things perfectly, if we need to have perfect outcomes, then definitely despair is the natural outcome. So like we were speaking about before, like one of two things happen if you need to be perfect. Either you work in a way that's completely overwhelming and stressful, and somehow you maintain that until you don't. And then when you can't maintain it anymore, then you just fall into despair because I know I can't do this. Well, yeah, you can't do what you were doing, or you can't be perfect. So, but if the belief is that I need to be perfect and I need to, reach, and I need to have outcomes, then it's very easy to feel much easier to feel a sense of despair, because I know that I haven't reached, I haven't achieved, I haven't gotten to the end, and it seems like it's a place that's too far for me to get to. So then despair is only a natural outcome of that perspective. So shifting the perspective on Avodas Hashem, as we were speaking about before, and saying that it's not necessarily, or it's not at all actually, about outcomes or about achieving. Here's one of the Mekayres, which everybody knows, but for some reason, again, it won't sound novel, but it's apparently novel. That Mishnah is describing Avodas Hashem. And it's saying, Mishnah Avis, that the way Avodas Hashem is set up is not for one to finish anything. So why would you be going for the finish line? Or why would you be saying that I need to get somewhere? The Mishnah says that is not how Avodas Hashem is set up. So what is Avodas Hashem about? You need to work. You need to take this seriously. You need to approach this with a sense of importance. And it's very important, and it's super serious. You need to get the job done. You're a mitzvah, you know, the Abishah says you have to do these things, you're not allowed to do those things. So we have to approach it with a sense of a willingness to work. If we approach it like that, then of course despair is something that would be a little bit less common, because what's there to despair about? You know, if the point is to reach somewhere, so then I'm not getting there. The point is to work, then you need to work. So I don't think this addresses the whole component. There's other parts, like I
That was
mentioned,
so
that we.
brilliant. That was so brilliant. That has got to be on a bumper sticker. It's because if it's all about results, so then there's a reason to despair. If it's all about work, then you got to keep working. That
Excellent, Michal. You put it on the sticker,
okay?
and
I'll send you the bill.
okay, perfect.
Put it.
I'll put it on both my cards.
I still have. I think I still have my father's credit card. So,
Excellent.
but it is then also maybe the next follow up question would be that it's all about work, and then there's no end to that. But I guess again, that doesn't really bother me because God commands that we should work. It's God's world after all. Am I correct in just saying it's about the work? God commands it, so we'll work until we die.
It definitely will require a big shift in perspective for most of us, because we are so used to having an outcome achievement based perspective. As we mentioned before, it's the world we live in. We value outcome. The American dream is about reaching some, end game, getting to an outcome. We honor and we value people who look to us, what we call success or being successful. So it's a very achievement outcome based world we live in, which affects our Avodas Hashem. So it's not as simple as just reading it on a bumper sticker, which is a
Mm-hmm.
good start, I think, Michal.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about a real shift in perspective that'll require from us to be able to see that as something that as an approach that we can work with. That there is an important work that needs to be done, and yeah, it's not about the outcome. It's not. There's definitely more that we could talk about in terms of how to work in a way that can be helpful, and
Mm-hmm.
in a way that can help us feel less despairing as we approach these days. But I think that's an important perspective to talk about.
I have a couple other pressing matters I think need to be dealt with, and we can't keep you too late here. Um,
I have all night. I'm good.
uh, I guess you can wake up with you can come. I get my 2-year-old at when she wakes up at 6 a.m. I don't know if that's going to work, but there's a couple matters that I hope that you can solve for me and for the rest of the world here as we're solving the world's problems here on the late night edition of the Motivation Congregation podcast. And that is, it isn't exactly mentioned. I can't even think of any source off the top of my mind. Um, but you had also mentioned this and before we started recording, the idea of patience in the steiging, in the growing, the idea that while I do pray, I just noticed this when we have a new month, we inaugurate it with a Birchas HaChodesh. We say we should be blessed for a long life. It's always bothered me that we should be blessed for a long life, even though we're only praying for only 1 month. I'm not really sure how that goes together, but it definitely feels like the idea would be that there is some sort of longer life or this amount of this deep rooted, patient, elongated, healthy type of idea that's behind that. I'm not sure if that made any sense or not. But the patience idea, I can't think of any sources about it, but you are a big believer in that Yiras Shomayim and that Torah and mitzvos and Elul should be done patiently. Yet Elul is only 1 month. How do those two combine for a beautiful God-fearing cocktail?
Yeah, good question. I think it really boils down to a lot of what we spoke about. It just makes sense to approach something with patience, and it does require that shifting of perspective, that we have work that needs to be done, and all work happens, slowly. You don't plant seeds in the ground and then come out the next day and see whatever you planted, fully blooming with, if you planted a fruit tree, you don't see those seeds you don't see the fruits the next day. You have to be patient. Whenever growth is involved, whenever change is involved, we can take a good example from the way growth happens in the natural world. The pasuk says, "Ki Adam eitz hasada," and the Svarim all speak about there's a comparison there. And the way growth happens is very slowly and one day at a time. And, it's not something that happens overnight. We have to be willing to approach our Avodas Hashem in the same way. And, again, if you're a brain surgeon and, you're going in for a 15-hour surgery, let's say, you have to work with patience. You don't want to work with a sense of billable, or I need to get something done already, or you got to approach the thing patiently. So even though there's a lot of, like you said, Elul is very serious. There's 40 days. We have to reach Rosh Hashanah, then we have to reach Yom Kippur. The smartest way to do that is to go through it patiently. But here's where, like, the natural way that people think is that now we're saying, oh, so you should be mediocre about it, or you should say, well, whatever happens, happens, because I'm just going to be patient. No, that's like, again, going to that other extreme. No, it's very serious. Do the work like a madman. There's only 40 days. Yes, we definitely have to remember that it's very serious, and that, you have to chap the chatziter, like they said in Yiddish, from Elul. I don't think they meant being nervous or overwhelmed. They meant taking the job seriously, but patiently. What else should you do? Patiently, by the way, means that we have to be open to falling. Sometimes the wind comes along, and sometimes, your little plant, turns this way or that way. It doesn't always. Sometimes you have to prune it a little bit. So growth happens through falling. It's not such a novel idea, but it may sound novel. Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'Kam, and I think that we take that as a b'diavad. That's why it sounds novel. Like we read that thing and we have a little bit, I think, of an introduction to that pasuk. The introduction goes like this: really, you're never supposed to fall. Really, if you're a good person, or you're a tzaddik, you never fall. But Shlomo Melech wants to give you some chizuk, so you shouldn't feel despair. So he says to you, by the way, if you fell, you should get back up, because, the tzaddikim who fall. That's not what it says by me in the pasuk. By me, it says that's the nature. Sheva always means that's the nature. 7. It can be more than 7.
That's
the way
good.
You always, we fall. That's what we do. There's no perfection. And if we can remember that, and we can recognize that doesn't have to be therefore a way that would say, well, then we could do whatever we want. No, it's a way of not falling into despair. And it's a way of being able to work patiently, because we recognize that growth includes falling. There's no way to go through a growth process perfectly. We're going to have failures. So we need to be patient, and we need to be able to get back up. And it's much easier to get back up if you have a healthy perspective about what this job of Avodas Hashem is about.
Is there a way to make it a healthy, let's say I want to make a commitment. Let's talk about commitments. Let's talk about Kabbalos for a second. That's a big part of it. Having something that you do consistently every day. I'm going to take on as a new commitment. I'm going to wake up on time. I'm going to wash Nagelwasser next to my bed. I'm going to kiss the mezuzah every single time. Maybe that'll be an exposure exercise, even though I'm afraid of the germs, as acrophobia. Is that what that's called? I don't know
Whatever.
Maybe. Okay, forget that.
Germophobia.
I'll stay in my lane. Germophobia. I'm gonna stay in my lane there. But how can I commit to something, stay patient with it, but yet still hit certain benchmarks that the commitment still stands and holds water?
I was hoping you would ask a question like this, and I think it's super important. I don't know how much time we'll have to address it, but I definitely would like to share a few points. So I think that the commitment factor, right, and being able to keep a commitment, and part of what our experience tells us is that we don't follow through, and our commitments don't last. And that goes back to the despair that you mentioned earlier that we tend to feel because, hey, the commitment I made last year doesn't last. So how do we make good commitments? How can we make commitments that last? What do we need to do to make that work? just to like, illustrate the challenge, just a little short story.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned I was living in Eretz Yisrael after I got married. And I used to end up sometimes in a shul. There was quite an interesting, eccentric rabbi who used to speak there, at various times. And it was in Elul, before Rosh Hashanah, I think, or before Yom Kippur, somewhere in the, in the high holiday season. And he got up and he basically said a whole speech about how tshuva is impossible. There's no way to do tshuva. It just doesn't work. There's no way for us to be able to do this. I've been there before. I've done it, and it just doesn't work. And there's really nothing that you can do about it because, let's be honest, we all, fake our way through this time, and we try, and it just doesn't have any lasting impact. So there's basically no way to do it. And his only saving grace to that was like the kind of, his point to say, okay, so what then? He said, well, at least we have a little bit of an upheaval in Elul. And in that way, we save ourselves from major punishment. There's such an idea mentioned in the chinuch, that Yom Kippur comes along to forgive all the verses. Because if everything would collect up without end, the vinous would be so much more than the schuyas, the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that kind of like cleans the slate a little bit, but of course it doesn't really work. And when I heard this, the question is a burning question, definitely. But I was at the same time terribly, terribly, disappointed that that's the only thing that you can offer people is basically despair, So that's your selling point. And it also really bothered me that the Torah, in speaking about Teshuvah, upcoming in one of these parshiyos, yeah. So it's painful. It's so painful, Michal, because we experience it as something that's impossible. The rabbi was simply speaking what so many of us feel, and as you mentioned, like, just doesn't work, it doesn't work. So, but the Torah says it's simple, So how do we approach this in a way that works? How can we do something with our El? How can we do something with our Yom Ne'ram? I don't have the foolproof answer, but I have some suggestions.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
because the cameras are zooming in, the microphones, the volumes are fully up, and we are all ears. Please save us.
I'll do my best. I'll try to save myself first, and hopefully through saving myself, I'll benefit.
I hope that we're in there too.
Yeah. Okay. So you can't start with everything. Okay. So you can't change. This is also something that should be pretty obvious. Only a young boy, at the start of his journey, comes, I'm going to become the next Gadol. It doesn't work that way. Okay. So if we have problems in our Avodas Hashem, in our mitzvahs and our Averis, if we have certain Averis that we struggle with, certain mitzvahs that we struggle with, you can't work on everything at once. You can't approach everything at once. That just doesn't work. So what do you pick? Okay, there are some guidelines for that too. Usually you should try to pick something that you feel is either a super hard struggle for you or a super important mitzvah or a super important avera or something that can have more of an impact on your life if you work on this as opposed to if you work on something that has less of an impact. Sometimes people pick, I'm sorry to say, silly Kabbalahs, things that won't really have any lasting impact, but you feel like you're doing something. It's not really, adding so much to one's Avodas Hashem if they, will say...
Commit to cutting their fingernails, according to halacha.
Something like that, let's say, yes. And I don't want to be, people are going to ask me the story like this and a story like that. I can't answer to every story, but yes, that is something that doesn't seem to add so much, or if I'll say an extra 2 kapitlach Tehillim after that, Tehillim is wonderful. It's wonderful. But these are not, things that are necessarily going to create a change. Teshuvah means that we have to have some type of returning.
Different mindset, different attitude, right.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to go to things that are going to be a little bit more personal, a little bit more influential in our lives, in the way we approach Avodas Hashem. Okay, so that's in terms of how to pick something, how to work on something, either where we really struggle or things that'll be a real big change for us, or things that are super important, which for so many people, there are a lot of the same things, We all could learn better. We all could daven better. We all struggle with certain things. You brought up Kedusha struggles. That does seem to be a universal struggle these days, not only because I see it, everybody's aware of it. There's so many movements and there's so many, all of them, Gavaldig, that they're trying to create more Kedusha in Klal Yisrael. We had an Asifa 15 years ago in City Field. There's a problem, and Hamaynam, definitely, most people struggle with this in some way. So definitely a lot of us can relate to areas where in general we all need to be working on. So how do you approach that? How do you approach it in a way that could work? What should you do? How do you do it in a way that could last? So one thing that we want to be able to think about is why we struggle in the area that we struggle. And that is something that very few people ever will pay attention to or contemplate. Why is this so hard for me? Why do I struggle with it? Let's pick an example. Let's say that somebody struggles with davening with kavana, even for any part of davening. Okay, we're not going to tackle the whole davening. Let's say somebody says, I want to be mechav in the first bracha. Why is that hard for me? What gets in my way? We have to be able to think about that. If we don't think about why a struggle is hard for us, but we only think about, I want to change, I want to do it, I want to learn more. That's another one. I want to incorporate more learning into my day. If I don't think about, well, why am I not? Why hasn't it worked in the past? Why is it that I struggle to learn more time? What's getting in my way? If I don't think about that, it's going to be very hard to make some type of commitment that has any hope of lasting if I'm not addressing what the issue is that's getting in my way. What's my obstacle? Does that make any sense, Michal?
It is so brilliant and yet so simple, which is normally the pshat that is the one that is the true pshat. In it seems like you're addressing that the siba, the cause, the causation, the causative factor is what we're trying to drill down to. And we're trying to say that the reason why Michal Brook doesn't pay attention at the beginning of his Shmona Esrei is, maybe it's because I didn't get enough sleep last night. Maybe it's because, what if it's just because I'm a spacey person? Or I don't actually enjoy or feel a connection in prayer. Let's say it's those things. Okay, fine. So you're nodding your head for those that are listening. So great. So now I have a new problem. Well, I have two problems. One is I'm not sure which one is actually the causative factor. And number two is, okay, what to do about this unknown subterranean issue.
Yeah. So I was nodding because you said so many plausible factors that could get in the way of concentrating by davening. There could be somebody who's not sleeping enough. Well, then, that should give you some indication about what you need to be doing. If you make some commitment to be davening better, you have to include with that some possibility of sleeping enough. If that's possible. Otherwise, you're not making a good commitment. Otherwise, maybe this isn't, if you have, babies and you work the night shift, maybe you can't work on this right now in your life. But if you can, by recognizing that what's getting in your way is fatigue, you have obviously a better way of addressing it. If you recognize I'm a little bit spacey, I tend to space out. Okay, what can help you stay focused? Would it be maybe deciding that part of your commitment to Muhammad the first bracha is putting your finger on the first bracha, each word. Don't worry about what people around you are thinking, You point, Baruch Ata Hashem. I tried it myself. It works pretty well because you are literally creating the focus by putting your finger on the place, and the word is literally, like jumping right back at you, So that could help if you recognize that this is what I can do, because for me, it's about focus. Another example you said, Michal, was maybe I don't have an appreciation for tefillah. Maybe I just don't know what this is about. Well, guess what? There's a million svarim that were written on tefillah. Find one that resonates with you. Find a way to develop meaning. Maybe you just have to know what the meaning of Pirush HaMilas are in that first bracha. There's a lot of important words there, but there might
I don't
be
know what the difference between Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibur, Hanorah is. It's all the same to me.
Yeah. So the truth is that, sometimes it's not necessarily knowing the distinct meaning of each word, but sometimes just having an appreciation for the concept, which is behind the bracha, which is enough for kavanah, by the way. You don't have to think each word how it's different than the other. I know that could be a little bit of a kick for people who like reading a million perushim on each word, especially when it comes to Yamim Neiram. But it's more about understanding what this bracha represents. What does the bracha of Avos mean? What is this about? You start with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. You end up with Umezi Goya. We're talking about, the Geula of Mashiach coming. So we end off with what's this bracha about? It might be something worth thinking about. And if I get interested, if I see that this bracha can somehow have more meaning in my life, now I have a better chance if I'm coming to make a Kabbalah, a commitment to work on Kavanah, because you've mentioned, Michal, so many great possibilities by just taking a little bit of time contemplating, why is this hard for me? Maybe davening is hard for me. Mincha is a disaster because I come running in straight from work, and the nature of my mind is that I get so into what I do, and there's no possibility for me to like create some headspace to be able to daven Shemoneh Esrei. That's why this is so hard for me. Or maybe because I come late to Shachar. So, okay, 1 second. So for me, mincha has to mean I have to get to shul 5 minutes early just to sit a little bit, That would be another example of by recognizing what's getting in my way. And we just spoke about davening, but we could speak about so many things. This davening is like a mitzvah, a positive thing. Learning, something gets in my way of learning. Something gets in my way by Averis. There's a reason why I struggle with Kedusha. Yes, even if we say it's a universal struggle, but there's something about it that for me makes it difficult. There's something that I am looking for. There's something that it's doing for me that making it very hard for me to just make a commitment and say, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to stop. Well, why do you do it? What speaks? By the way, Michal, this is all a Mishnah. The Mishnah says in Avis, have a mechashev, hefsid mitzvah keneged schara, uschar avera keneged efseda. Here's what that means. Hefsid mitzvah keneged schara means you have to think about, what am I losing out when I do the mitzvah? And then what do I stand to gain by doing the mitzvah? And I have to think about the schar avera. How am I benefiting from the avera comparing to what I'm losing from the avera? So you see from the Mishnah, it's not enough just to contemplate the hefsid avera or the schar mitzvah. That's all that most of us do. We basically just focus on why I need to be doing, the schar mitzvah or the hefsid avera, without focusing on, well, why is there a schar avera? What is this avera doing for me? And what is the hefsid mitzvah? What is the mitzvah? What is the part that's difficult for me in this mitzvah? If you don't think about that, well, then you're ignoring the Mishnah's advice to how to work on your Avodas Hashem.
It's the whole point of the world, even that's audacious claim, but it seems like our entire job, according to the Rambam in his book Mishnah Torah, in I believe it's chapter 1 or 2, when he advises as to how to come to the love of God, is to contemplate Torah, God's wisdom, God's world, and learn about it. But it's ultimately to then say, what's the cause of all of this? What is the root? What's driving this? Rabbi Yerucham and the Musar sources, they're very much into only fools get stuck at just the outcomes and the results. But smart people understand why things are happening. Avram Avinu sought until age 40 to figure out what is the cause behind everything and going a step deeper. That's leaping to mind. I'd like to take this to the PG-13 hour of the show as we tick here past midnight. So I guess we can put a little pause here for any parents that are listening or anyone else that maybe the content wouldn't be suitable for them. I don't imagine we'll get too off the rails here, but content hopefully that will be helpful to people. God commands that, it's pretty open, that to any lewdness, al tikrav, do not even come near it. And that includes any sort of viewing of immorality. And it definitely includes any sort of touching of immorality or all of the other plethora and bevy of sexual sins, immoral sins. You're an expert in this area. And I can imagine that your phone is ringing off the hook because it just seems like the Yetzer Hara gave up in idolatry and gave up in gazela and stealing. I mean, I guess maybe that's still a little bit in style, but it just seems like it's a dime a dozen for people that struggle with it. How about every single person, including myself, that you're just inundated with things that you can't even believe your eyes when you're walking across the street, that you are really even unable to step out of the way of bus advertisements. And so a real person really can feel stuck in this area. When you couple that with that, this is something that nafshoy shel adam, is something that it's a natural desire in a person. This tanks spiritual growth faster than nearly anything. Is immoral, arias, lewdness. How do we help ourselves during Elul? How does a person go about it? Someone walks into your office and says, I am just a well-meaning, good person, and I watch things I shouldn't watch or do things I shouldn't do, and I wish I could stop, but I can't. Please help me. What do you say?
Wow. So very, very difficult topic to address in a very short kind of way. And as you mentioned, something that I think a lot of people can identify with. But let's talk about it a little bit. So I think that in short, a lot of it would be connected to what we spoke about earlier. And this is definitely something that I address with my clients. And that is that we also have to go back to what we spoke about before again, about being able to approach this in a way of work, not in a way of only success and outcomes, especially as the problem is so prevalent, as the problem is so all over the place. And for somebody who already struggles with it, to have the thought that I'm going to be able to completely get this out of my life and stop cold turkey, and I'm never going to have any failings, that is completely unrealistic, and it's not going to work, and it'll only bring on despair when the person, has their first fall, or when they recognize that the challenge is too big for them to overcome. So one of the most helpful things that I share with my clients is actually, I can share it. It's a short little saying that I heard based on a story. So here it goes. So Rav Noach Orlowik, who I mentioned before, I heard from him that when he was learning as a yeshiva bacher, so this goes back probably 60 years ago or so, he was learning about Victor Miller. I'm not sure where the story took place, which yeshiva. I imagine it was in Reb Chaim Berlin, where Victor Miller was the mashgiach there. And one day, Reb Noach Orlowik, his chavrusa comes in, and he confides to Reb Noach. He says to him, my Yetzer Hara is driving me crazy. It's just too much. I don't know what to do anymore. And he was referring to this Yetzer, the Yetzer Darayas. So Reb Noach said to his chavrusa, he said, listen, why don't you go ask Rebbe? Maybe he'll have a suggestion for you. So he goes over to Victor Miller, and Victor Miller is sitting there, and this Talmud leans over and he says, Rebbe, I don't know what to do. My Yetzer Hara is driving me crazy. I just don't have a solution for it. So Victor Miller looks up at him and he says, don't worry about it. The first 100 years are the hardest.
I'm not sure what to do with that.
Ad kana ma'isa. The response that Victor Miller was saying to him was that part of what makes the challenge so overwhelming is when a person's unwillingness to recognize that this is not something that you can just solve in a moment. And that, if you only had the right solution and the right strategy, then you would be able to overcome this once and for all and live the glorious life that you would want to, the Kedusha, the Tahira, and you'll be like the Malachim in Shomayim. No, that's not a good way to approach this. And in fact, that's only going to create this overwhelming sense that this Bacher felt. I don't know what to do. Calm down, Of course you have failings. Don't worry about it. The first 100 years are the hardest. Be prepared to work. It's so much connected with everything we spoke about earlier. If you need to be some perfect person and you never allowed to have any failings, then you are going to feel very full of shame and despair with this struggle. But if you recognize that you need to work, definitely we have to have a way to work. And that goes back a little bit to what we talked about before, creating a way to understand. This is something I do with my clients as well. We have to understand why we struggle the way we struggle. But at the same time, we have to recognize that this is something that we have to be willing to work on. And if we're willing to work, not only succeed and achieve, that makes the whole approach to it a lot less overwhelming and a lot more sensible, and a willingness then to engage in the work, because it's about
What is
work.
the work? What is the work?
You want to know how we do the work. You want to know how I
How
can
do I
do this.
work hard? Is it protection? Is it filters? Is it not going out? Is it maybe committing to praying harder? What is the work?
All of the above. It's so hard to address in a short way. If the work is whatever works, how do you run a business? How do you run a business? You have to figure out what works. Sometimes this works, sometimes that works. Avodas Hashem should be run like a business, lahavdil. Sometimes this works, sometimes that works. But definitely, when you're running a business, you can't sit on the couch and do nothing. You can't be overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, I have bills to pay at the end of the month. How am I ever going to get there? And it's so hard. You have to figure out some strategies to create a good business plan and a good way of working, not a way of reaching a $10 million. You don't have to want to be a world. You don't have to want to be Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos in order to work in your business. This is another good example. I have to have a she'ifa to be like Jeff Bezos, then I'll work in my business. Otherwise, why would I get up and go to work in the morning? That's absolute foolishness. No, because you have bills to pay. There's something very serious and important that needs to get done. So you have to figure out how to do it. But now you ask me, Michal, how do I do it? Like, what? So there are different strategies. And for Kedusha, what are the strategies? How can you work on it? It really depends on what the person's particular struggle is. And yes, you have to incorporate a lot of different things to help people who struggle with this. What are some of the ways that we help people who, have a struggle? How can you approach this in a way that works? You have to find something that resonates with you as to why you want to work on it. And this also goes back to speaking about commitments in general. So one point we made about commitments earlier was to find the reason why something is hard for us. But now that we found, let's say, why something is a struggle for us, the second half of it is what the Mishnah calls, the benefit, the schar mitzvah, like what can I get out of doing this that would resonate with me? So if I decide to, for example, just work on Kedusha simply because it's wrong and I don't want to do it, and even if I understand, why I have a pull to it, but now I don't introduce any reason or anything that resonates with me for why I would like to work on this, then that's going to be a very difficult challenge, because I have nothing that's fueling my drive or my energy to work other than that I don't want to be doing this. Or an example of what I want to be doing, let's say, when it comes to Kabbalah, I just want to do it, but I don't have anything that speaks to me. But remember earlier when we spoke about davening, we said some solutions about go with something that works, right? So for Kedusha, for example, finding a reason why that might resonate. I gave some examples earlier about, let's say, work, doing exercise. If all I knew was that I need to do exercise because the doctor said I need to do exercise, it might fizzle out pretty fast. But if I could attach in my own mind some reason why that's important to me, let's say I value my health and I value being around for my family for a long time, and I can link my exercise with being healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So then now I have a very strong reason why, even if it's 12 o'clock at night and I'm, finishing off my late show here with Michal, by the pleasure of speaking to, I might still change into my jogging clothing and go for a jog, even though I'm not so in the mood, because the idea of exercising resonates with me in my life, because it has some importance and some meaning in doing it. So going to Kedusha, it's very difficult to give an example that will resonate with everybody, but let's give one, okay? Let's say somebody who's married struggles in the area of Kedusha. There could be some ideas that might motivate them and resonate with them to say why it's helpful for them to work on Kedusha, because it adds, for example, to a healthier relationship with their spouse, which they value. That could resonate. When I don't engage in something that's a contradiction or something that's going to interfere, and recognizing that interferes with my commitment to my wife, or my ability to relate to her in an appropriate way. Or I can recognize that it's about loyalty, and that's something that resonates with me. If I find some way to approach my commitment in a way that it resonates, that's the word I'm going to keep on using, I'll also have a much easier chance of getting it done. I want to just sum up, Michal, like 3 points that I want to make in terms of commitment. The one is to recognize why something is difficult. Once we understand that, as we spoke about earlier, it'll be a lot more simple to now find a way to address what we need to address in terms of the Kabbalah, the commitment we want to make. The second point is to find on the flip side then, well, why it's difficult, but now why would I want to do it? What could resonate about davening for me? What could resonate about learning? Why is learning important? I know now why it's difficult for me for all the reasons that we didn't mention, but there could be many reasons. Okay, why is it important now? Why would I want to devote another half hour a day to learning? There could be different parts of Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, that speak to me personally. When I connect a part of that to my commitment, when I connect my own interest and something that would be interesting and motivate me, that gives a far more impactful and lasting Kabbalah, because now there's a reason why I would keep it up, even come Purim time, even come Hanukkah time, because it still makes sense to exercise even 6 months after you see the doctor, not only the next day. If it's all about getting all scared and nervous, doctor says you need it for your heart, so you have to exercise. Oh, I get all nervous, so you'll jog for a week, and then you'll say it's too hard. But if you say, you know what, health is important, my family's important, my life, that could keep up 6 months later also. I connected some idea that resonates with me, and therefore I could keep up this commitment, and it'll keep on going. But here's the third very important point: doable, practical. This is something that I think people probably heard before. You can't make a big commit. You can't commit to going jogging every single night. That's not going to last. But maybe you could decide, 2 to 3 nights a week. You can't commit to davening the whole Shemay Esrei b'Kavanah, even if you understand why davening is hard, which was point number 1. Even if you understand, and now something about davening resonates with you, and you got point number 2, you're not going to keep that up for the whole Shemay Esrei. You're not going to be able to learn an extra 5 hours a day. You're not going to be able to completely. Now with Kedusha, with a lay essay, it gets very tricky.
Mm-hmm.
So we can never condone doing negative things, but we have to be practical about how to work on it. I could talk more about that. I know it's very late, but the third point was doing it a Kabbalah, a commitment that's practical. If we put these 3 things together, when it comes to commitment, I've tried it myself. You can have a much far lasting impact, much beyond, Matzah Yom Kippur, beyond Sukkot, even beyond Hanukkah, even beyond Purim, if you understand why you struggle where you struggle. If now you make a effort to add on something why this resonates with you, why you want to do what you're doing, why you want to work on this mitzvah, why you want to work on this avera, and to make a Kabbalah that's very super practical, that you do have to put an effort, like you can't sit on your couch, whether that's 10 minutes more of learning, whether that's first bracha of Shemay Esrei, whether that's doing X, Y, and Z when it comes to Kedusha, what you're going to do specifically, practically, it has to be very practical. If you do that, Michal, nothing is guaranteed in life. We're not perfect. We might have some failings along the way. Actually, we'll definitely have some failings along the way. But but I think that can be helpful.
It's super helpful. It's like I'm jumping out of my skin type of helpful.
You're gonna try it, Michal, and I'm gonna see you in Shul Purim time, and you're gonna say to me, if some of the ideas we spoke about and some of the things that maybe you try, that you might say to me, this is the first year. Well, not you. I know you're a perfect guy, but let's just say you might say to me, Purim time. This is the first time that I actually use these strategies, and I'm keeping a commitment that I made from, I don't know, Rosh Hashanah or even beginning of Elul, Chodesh Elul, till now, because it made sense, because I know why it was hard. Once I figured that out, I knew what I had to do to address it, and I worked on that. And I did something super simple. It was only 5 minutes, or it was only one bracha, or it was only this. And of course, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Like, yeah, it's harder Purim time, but you still have a reason to push through. Like I said, it's not easy after the ending the show at 12:30 to get up and I'd rather go into bed maybe, but it still has a possibility of influencing me and me actually doing what it is that I'm committed to doing.
You got to know your why. You got to know your why. Is that something we could say? You got to know
Yes,
why you're
exactly,
doing it. You got to know
exactly.
your
And
why.
it's so simple, but so many people never think about this. All they say is, "Okay, look at this whole list. I look at the Chidah from Aleph to Taf. I have a problem with everything, and I need to change everything. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to work on changing everything, and I'm going to get all
Mm-hmm.
nervous. I'm in Ken Yirasin, and then nothing works. Or even those who are a little bit more intelligent say, I'm not going to work on everything. I know Zalzanta says you have to make a Kabbalah Katana, so I'll work on one thing. But then they never thought about points 1 or 2. Either why is it so hard for me? And they never
Mm-hmm.
thought about, well, why do I want to work on this? Other than I know that God says you need to work on it. That's what the Mishnah calls, that this, the Hefzer Aveira or the
Mm-hmm.
Schar Mitzvah. But you have to know, why
Mm-hmm.
that's important to you. If you can find something that resonates, you have a far stronger reason to be able to have your commitment be lasting and why you'll want to work on it come Lag BaOmer and the summer and
I
everything else.
remember. I remember when I first got a why for Torah study. When I was in yeshiva, it was you had to learn because that's how you get a good shidduch, and that's how you kind of just float through and make friends or do. That's cool. It's cool to learn now. Only less cool people don't learn. But once I got a why, which is that I wanted my family to think that I was super holy and knew a lot of Torah, like that actually mattered to me. And then I also wanted to have ulterior motives. I wanted to be the most well educated so that I could go ahead and maybe become a big rabbi and get paid. And I want to pay my bills. And if I'm a bad rabbi, I can only make $40,000. But if I'm a great rabbi, even though it was a bad ulterior motive, when I found a bad why, but at least it was a real why that resonated for me. It helped to spur some a better memory because it mattered more energy. Hitting the gym in younger years had a why, as I wanted to make sure that the person I was guarding in basketball had a miserable life, and we would win. So now there's a reason to hit the gym, and there's a why there. So it's coming in, and I would like to conclude with one last, um, hopefully picking at a scab that hopefully isn't infected, opening up of a wound type of topic. And that is maybe where it all begins in climbing up the hill of tshuva, but we don't really need to climb the hill. We just need to continue to try our best to climb the hill and do it in a healthy, balanced way. And we're going to work really hard and we're going to do it, as you say. And we have all these new points here. But first, you got to remove your shoes because the ground is holy. Rav Dessler writes that you got to be honest with yourselves. Moshe Rabbeinu's first step is there's a removing of your shoes. You have to have the boldness and the courage to be honest with sins, to be honest with shortcomings, to have the honesty to say, I struggle here, to have the halachic understanding of saying vidui, Rav Hirsch explains, because you need to audibly admit and not quell the self-righteousness or masquerade that we put up. I don't know if that made any sense, but we have to be honest with ourselves of certain shortcomings we have. But when we're honest with ourselves and when we look back, that can bring back some past demons and also bring us down and chain us to the bottom of Mariana's Trench. So I think that's the deepest trench in the world, the lowest sea level. But how do we, in a very healthy way, look at our past and be honest with our mistakes and still attempt to climb the mountain of tshuva? I promise I'll let you go after this. I promise.
Silas Chacham Chati Tshuva, it's really a
What does that
question of
mean? What does that mean?
that means that when a wise person asks the question, very often the answer is within the question, or a big part of the answer is within the question. So I was referring to the way you just kind of set up the question, speaking about being able to be honest with ourselves, and being able to do that is definitely a challenge. And it's something though that will be easier if I'm going to keep on referring to everything that we kept on saying here tonight. If we can recognize that it's okay not to be perfect, it's okay to struggle. First 100 years are the hardest. The Mesilas Yesharim in the beginning of his Sefer in Zehirus, he is not trying to make this particular point. He's bringing this concept or this idea for something else. But what he does say is he brings a whole litany of examples of some of the greatest people in our history who all had failures. He says Avram failed when he said Bama Eda, and Yaakov Avinu had failures, and
They were all punished brutally.
Yes, definitely. So that's actually the point he's coming to make, which can open up a whole other topic here, Michal. We can have a different night open for that if you like.
I think
But
Henny's waking up here in a couple hours, but yeah.
Yeah. But what he does say is, which you can't ignore, the fact is that there was never a human being, I won't say never, but he's basically bringing out the point that there's almost never, at least, a human being. We're not going to be greater than Avram or Yaakov or any of the people he lists there, any of the great men or women. And therefore, we can very much, and on Tilti Sharm is written as a sefer to work on Avodas Hashem. You know, the purpose of the sefer is to help you work. And he starts out in the beginning of the sefer saying, well, Avram never made it, and Yaakov never, really made it, and everybody had failings. So, so what you just say? Oh, obviously he means to say, well, good luck. So you may as well do nothing. No, so get to work. Get to work. So what? You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. If we can acknowledge that, then it's easier for us to have a little bit more of an honest look at ourselves without feeling so broken. But if we feel like I'm the only one who struggles, which, by the way, when it comes to Kedusha, I think in today's world, it's more widespread that people recognize it's a universal challenge. But often, yeshiva bachrim still will come in, with the feeling that, like, I must be the only one in the world who struggles with it, which, of course, adds to a lot of shame about the topic. But if we can recognize, and that's part, actually, for those type of people, part of the work is just recognizing that it's a struggle. Sometimes, as a question about therapy, sometimes a bacher who's struggling with this just needs a little bit of education and just the understanding that he's not the only one who's struggling with this, to help him just be able to function better, not be so destroyed when he recognizes that, hey, I'm normal, and it's just a normal struggle. Yeah.
That is it's almost like in this interview, it gives Elul more hope and more opportunity. It makes it feel like we've restored here, hopefully, some elements of that their Yemei Ha'ava. I found the Vilna Gaon say that it's the Yemei Haratzon. They're good, happy days. They're not scary days. They're days of hopefully introspection, honest introspection. And I love what you said there, and perhaps we can conclude with this, is if it's this idea of I am a person, and it's a challenge. The first 99 years are the hardest. First 100 years are the hardest, however Rabbi Victor Miller said it. And but I love getting to work. And I clap al chet and ashamnu, but that just inspires me to keep working on it and to make smart commitments based on understanding the root causes of some of the challenges. And when I get myself a why and I get myself a reason to stag and I give myself a purpose and I go about it in a smart and systematic way, then success is imminent, Teshuvah is probable, and we'll all sing Kumbaya with crowns on our heads in the future paradise in Olam Haba. Is that a summary?
That's an amazing summary, Michal. And it sounds like such a great episode that I'll make sure to listen to it myself, because I also can use some help with doing tshuva and figuring out how to approach this. So I hope to gain some great ideas from this episode.
This is so good. I thank you so much for your time. And any person definitely that needs or wants and is strongly encouraged to reach out, I'll leave all the ways they can get in touch with you. Hopefully it won't be, I'm definitely not going to go about putting your cell phone number, but there'll be an office number. So if someone wants to learn more about the ways that you can help people one-on-one and go about this in a certain way, highly encouraged, and I'll leave that for them. And Thank you very much for your time. Kesiva vechasima tova, and thank you.